Sandhan, All Gujarat Integrated Classroom.
સેટેલાઇટના માધ્યમથી જોડતી કડી એટલે સંધાન.
Hello, dear friends. Today we are going to discuss the literary features of the Romantic Age. As you have been studying the different ages of English literature, you are aware of the fact that it is very important to understand the features of the age in order to interpret the text, in order to appreciate the text, in order to comprehend the text that you would be dealing with. To be able to appreciate the literature of a period, it is very important to know the background in which the work was written. It is also important to know the experiences of the country, of the nation where the book was written. Therefore, the political, the social, the economic conditions of the country, of the nation, is somewhere reflected in the literature of the period. Now, while looking at the literary features of this Romantic Age, the Romantic Age, as you can see on the monitor, it's from 1790 to 1830. This specific period is considered to be known as the Romantic Age. You can also see another title, a subtitle mentioned here, The Return of the Nature. This subtitle is enough to give you a glimpse of how the Romantic Age would have been. Before we proceed further to understand the features of the Romantic Age, let us look at the historical background of the age. You will find the French Revolution has influenced the Romantic Age to a great extent. The European War, the war between England and France, which took place in 1793, did play a very significant role in influencing the literature that was written during this period. The hostility between the two countries, England and France, it continued till 1815, though the European War ended in 1793, but you will find the effects of the war continuing, the hostility between the two countries, two nations, which continued till 1815. After the end of the French Revolution, you will find that there were a lot of different events which took place in the different parts of Europe, and these sporadic events which affected Europe definitely had a direct effect on the literature written during this period. In the historical background, you will also find the rise and destruction of Napoleon's power, which had a major influence. Restoration of the Bourbon dynasty. We come to the reaction. What was the reaction that you will find is there was hope, there was gain for mankind, and you will also find a very significant literary feature, that is the publication of the Lyrical Ballad. This was jointly written and published by Wordsworth and Coleridge. This had a significant impact on the literature written during this period. Other than the Lyrical Ballad's publication, you will find a lot of other reactions which include disappointment, disillusionment, dejection, despair. These are all the results of the war which had continued for a long time. You will also find that with a new age, with the onset of a new age, the old order being destroyed. So you will find that the previous age, the Augustan age, was shedding its features and new features were taking shape during the Romantic age. So destruction of the old order is a very predominant feature which you have to understand. Now, initiation of the new, whenever the old order is destroyed, something new is initiated. You will find there was a new philosophy of liberty. When we are discussing these specific features, we can think of the Elizabethan period, which is quite similar. You can compare the kind of experiences of that age being repeated here in the Romantic age as well. So the new philosophy that came into existence after the end of the French Revolution was liberty, fraternity and equality. And you will find they were younger writers. Wordsworth and Coleridge. Wordsworth, more often you will consider him as a more matured kind of a senior kind of a writer, but you will find younger writers like Leigh Hunt, Shelley and Keats, who still adhered to the revolutionary doctrine. They wanted to bring about sudden change, and how did they try to bring about? Through their writings. You will also have a look at the social conditions of this period. The end of the war would bring about misery. There was low wages, there was unemployment, heavy taxation. So there was no reason for people to be happy. Therefore, you will find a lot of disillusionment, despair amongst people of England. Resentment brought call for social justice. So when you are happy, there are no problems. But when you are unhappy, there is resentment, there is anger, there is hatred. Then there is a need for social justice. And two writers who brought about a major contribution, who contributed towards bringing in social justice, were Shelley and Ebenezer Elliott. These two writers need special mention, especially because this was the challenge that was there in front of them, and they did try to bring in through their writings an element of social justice which was much needed during that period. Whenever there are problems, there are need for reforms. So the Reform Bill, which was brought in 1832, but the Reform Bill also brought disappointment. There was an intensified interest in social conditions, and these were the various events which influenced and colored the literature of this period. When we understand the background, the historical background, the political background, it becomes easier for us to understand the features, the literary features of the age, the Romantic age which we are talking about. If we have to specifically talk about the literary features, there are 6 major features which we will discuss today. Now these features are based on the book History of English Literature, the 5th edition by Edward Albert. Now this text is prescribed by Gujarat University, and therefore the features we will be discussing will be basically focusing on the elements that are mentioned in this book. What are the literary features that we will be discussing? The 6 of them, which are very important. Abundant output. That's why I said there would be a resonance of the Elizabethan age. That was one age which was very rich as far as literature was concerned, where this is one common feature that you will find. If you can try to bring about a comparison between these two ages, you will find a lot of similar things happening. So abundant output is one of the feature. We will discuss that at length. there was range of subjects. Different kinds of subjects were dealt with because there were no fixed traditions or rules or norms to be followed, and therefore you will also find that there's a treatment of nature. As we looked at the subtitle, The Return of the Nature, how nature is being discussed here through the writings. Nature plays a very significant role, and how it is evolved in the writings of this period. You will also find political and periodical writing had taken the front stage. There were a lot of periodical writing which were generated during this period. You will also find the influence of Germany and the American literature which came into existence. It is still a very in an infant stage, American literature, but this is one of the feature that you will definitely notice in the Romantic period. Now let us focus on each one of the literary feature to be able to understand what it stands for. When we talk about abundant output, the message is very clear that a lot of works were being written and published and read and appreciated during this period. Therefore, we again go back to the Elizabethan age, where you will find the similar kind of things happening. You will find that this is not an age where a particular genre was written or was focused on. You will find that poetry, prose, novel, essay, all these various forms of literature were addressed, were given justice. They were all written, they were all being read and appreciated, and therefore a lot of different kinds of works were being generated during this period. You will find new ideas coming in. There is also a fresh inspiration for poetry, because the subject that you derived for poetry came straight from the nature. So it could be the flowers, the landscape, the mountains, the rivers. The beauty of the nature was being replicated in the literature of this period. So new ideas came in. Wordsworth's Daffodils is one such important topic which needs to be discussed, because Daffodils is a very popular poem. I'm sure you must have read that poem. You will find a kind of a freshness, how daffodils, the flowers, inspired the poet. Lot of critical miscellaneous writers were also found during this period. So in order to justify that one literary feature, the abundance of output, you will find prose, poetry, you will find essays being written. We come to the next topic, the next feature of the Romantic age, and that is there are vast range of subjects which were being addressed by these writers. They were all very new writers, they were all very buoyant writers. They put forth their experience, they shared their knowledge through the writings, and therefore it was not, there was no stereotyped kind of a expression that you will find in the writings of the Romantic age. Breaking away from tradition, Romanticism, the word itself means that there is a lot of freedom here to explore and share experiences. But at the same time, there were a group of writers who also tried to revisit the classical writers. They tried to explore the writers, classical writers, and two of the prominent names that you can figure out are Shelley and Keats, P.B. Shelley and John Keats. These two writers were genius for this specific reason that they definitely try to explore the classical. They try to bring in Ode to a Grecian Urn is one such example, which you will find. The Middle Ages inspired the novels, that's the fiction writing of Scott. You will find that the Middle Ages also inspired two very prominent poets, Coleridge and Robert Southey. What these writers did were they tried to analyze the modern times, they tried to understand the times, and they tried to bring in that, they tried to dissect these experiences in their novels. Satires of Byron and other miscellaneous writers were also a part of this feature. Now, nature is scrutinized and summed up afresh. The third important feature of the Romantic Age is the treatment of nature, how nature is being treated by these writers. Simple chronicle, simple expression of the nature that they saw around them were represented in the writings, were produced in the writings. And very sympathetic, a passionate, a kind of a expressions are also there. There is a sympathetic observation of natural features in some of the works of Cowper, Crabbe, Gray. These were the writers who had that sympathetic observation of nature. There were new race of poets who came about. They were matured. They tried to bring in maturity in the writings. Their observations were very intimate observations, and these were replicated in the writings. Wordsworth is one name which is synonymous with the Romantic Age when we talk about the return of the nature, because Wordsworth is one such writer whose feeling for nature was something different. It was an experience for him. It rises to a very passionate veneration, something equivalent to love or religion. So that is the kind of experience that Wordsworth had. He perceived nature very differently, unlike other writers. That is why I would like to rather stress this point on Wordsworth, because a very prominent writer of the Romantic Age, who cannot be missed when we are discussing the Romantic Age, whose ideas about fancy and imagination caught our imagination rather. So Wordsworth's perception of nature was different. He not only talked about the seasons, but the seasons' fulfillment, its culmination. He also discussed about it led to the natural and the supernatural. Nature is glorified by him. He gives a lot of importance and significance to nature. Nature is considered to be Mother Nature. So glorification of nature is very much evident in the writings of Wordsworth. They are amplified in his writings. You will find that the presence of nature is not only in the flowers, as I mentioned, daffodils, which Wordsworth wrote, but they were also there in the fields, in the light of setting suns, the round ocean, the living air, the blue sky, and even in the mind of the man, you could find the presence of nature. Now let us discuss the fourth very important feature of the Romantic Age: political and periodical writing. This was developed during this period to a great extent. Political and periodical writings were a matter of great emphasis for the Romantic Age writers, the period belonging to the Romantic Age. Literature and politics. There are a lot of politics which will find its way in literature, and literature definitely exhibits the politics of country. A lot of political writings were found during this period. Number of periodicals was greatly added. Let us quickly have a glimpse at the various periodicals which were published during this period. Some of them were known by these names: the Morning Chronicle, the Morning Post, the Times, literary magazines, the Edinburgh Review, the Quarterly Review. These are some of the very prominent periodicals that were written. We have a few more names: Blackwood's magazine, the Westminister Review. Some of the best works of Hazlitt, Lamb, Southey and other miscellaneous writers were also published during this period. Before we proceed further to the next major feature of the Romantic Age, we will quickly try to understand that there was abundance of writings, abundance of output, lot of literature was being written. The emphasis on the nature with specific mention of Wordsworth. I did give you certain examples how nature was glorified, amplified, how the perception of nature was not restricted to flowers or mountains or rivers. There were a whole lot of subjects from nature which were being discussed during this period. And now we move forward to the next literary feature, the influence of Germany. During the Elizabethan age, we did discuss about the Greek influence. Earlier than that, we had the Latin influence. English literature and language were influenced by various other languages. But what we find now, that the after effect of the French Revolution or the Cold War which took place between France and England, the political scenario also changed. You will find that England becomes more closer to Germany, and therefore the German influences are visible in the literary writings of Romantic Age. The bitterness is a resultant of the long war which took place between England and France. The first poetical work of Scott was based on the German. You will also find new influence of these writings visible in the works of Coleridge as well. When we talk about the Romantic Age, how can we not discuss Shelley and Byron, the very prominent writers, prominent poets of the Romantic Age? Till the middle of the 19th century, German language continued to dominate as a foreign language in England. Therefore, you will find that this influence was very much evident in the literature of this period. If we can have a quick look at the next literary feature of this Romantic Age, we will find that American literature is visible there. American literature, it's a new country with its new literature. It's a very young nation which which was being very prominent in the literary field. You will find that it showed a promise of a literary future. But whatever was being produced as a part of the American literature were mostly the imitation of the English products. Novel genre was initiated, and this was the most popular form or genre of the American literature. The most prominent novelist, Fenimore Cooper, who made his place, who established himself as the most prominent novelist of this young nation called America. With the arrival of the American literature, Fenimore Cooper finds his place as one of the first or the most, initiator of the novel form. As a novelist, Fenimore Cooper has a place in American literature. The other notable writer that you will find is Washington Irving. Now, when we have discussed the 6 major features of the Romantic Age, let us quickly sum up these features so that we remember them, we are able to reproduce them, and understand the literary texts written during this period if we keep at the back of our mind these features. As I began by saying that French Revolution played a major role in the production or influencing the Romantic Age literature. Romantic poetry came into existence as a result of the French Revolution. You will find voice for absolute freedom. This is where, when I talk about liberty, fraternity, things like that, you are reminded of the Elizabethan age. The Elizabethan age and Romantic age have a lot of things in common. You will find that there was absolute freedom to write about any given topic. So when we talk about the expression of nature, there are diverse views, diverse expressions of nature that you will find in the writings of the Romantic period. The other most prominent aspect that you will find is moral and imaginative morality is important. At the same time, with the arrival of Wordsworth, who focused on imagination was given a lot of importance in the writings. Any kind of creative writing that were produced during this period were the result of the imagination or the fanciful mind of the writer of that period. So creativity was given a lot of importance. The creative process was given a lot of importance. And when you give importance or significance to the creative process, you will definitely oppose the artificial and contrived modes of expression which you find in the previous age, the Augustan age. Augustan age had a lot of artificiality in its writing. Need I mention Alexander Pope? The contrived modes of expression which was popularized during the Augustan age. But the Romantic age is a total contrast of its previous age, Augustan age. It had left behind all that contrived modes of expression, the artificiality. Everything was left behind, and there was idealized visions of perfection and beauty. So nature, beauty, these were the things which were relished. Now, if we can quickly try to understand the literary features of the Romantic age, there were a lot of writings you will find. That is why we again go back on the abundance of output. When we talk about abundance of output, a lot of literature was being produced because it was there was freedom to the writers, there was freedom of expression, There was freedom of thought. They thought differently, they wrote differently, they explored and experienced different things which found its place in the literature of this period. So abundance of output is the most important aspect, where you will find not only poetry was written, but Walter Scott with his historical romances, with his novels, was equally popular. So you found the novelists also found a very clear space for themselves during the Romantic age. You will find the influence of Germany with the kind of a rift between France and England. French was no more used or taught in England. Earlier it used to be considered to be a very, very fashionable language, and in England you would find that French language was popularized. But with the Cold War between the two countries, it was relegated. It was not given the kind of prominence it deserved, and you will find that the only foreign language which was dominant in England during this period was the German language as a foreign language. So English had an influx of the Latin, the Greek, the French, and now during the Romantic age you will find that it was the German influence which was very strong and visible in the literature that was written during this period. The most prominent writers that come to our mind when we talk about the Romantic age are William Wordsworth and Coleridge, because it is with the publication of the Lyrical Ballads in 1798 that you can say somewhere the onset of the Romantic age, because prior to that the contrived kind of mood of the Augustan age was left behind, and there was a open space for expressing getting some kind of a space for the imagination. Imagination was the focus. That was the main thing which helped in the creative process of the writings of the Romantic age. You will find very young poets like Byron, Keats, who were rebels to some extent, but they also did pay much attention to the classical works, and they tried to imitate those classical works in their writings, and therefore you will find an element of a new kind of a visiting the classical period by these two young writers. Byron also a rebel, so to a great extent you will find that these two writers belonged to the younger generation who had an element of rebelliousness in them, which were depicted through their writings. They looked at the classical writings in a different way, with a fresh mind, and breaking away from the traditions. Yes, it did happen during the Romantic age, because the word romanticism itself suggests that there was a lot of space for freedom, for expressing one's mind, for allowing one's mind to imagine and write about anything that they found to be fascinating. And therefore the works of Wordsworth, Byron, Keats, Shelley, these were the writers who definitely discussed about nature a lot. The famous line of John Keats, how beauty was idealized during this period, to emphasize that point, I would like to say that when John Keats said, "A thing of beauty is a joy forever," this kind of an idealization of beauty, how beauty was glorified, that is very much evident from the writings of these writers. Walter Scott needs mention because the Romantic age was predominantly, though you had a lot of other genres being explored and written during this period, as I said, that abundance of output included a lot of other writings. But at the same time, you will find that these writers, Byron and Keats, they were different from Coleridge and Wordsworth. Coleridge, for that matter, used to have a lot of supernatural, in his element of supernatural in his writings. As we are all aware, students of literature are aware that most of the time Coleridge, who was an opium addict, had this kind of a focus on the supernatural. The Rime of the Ancient Mariner is a wonderful example where you will find the influence of the Middle Age to some extent in his writings. So when we say that it's a fresh kind of a age where you had new thoughts coming in, new ideas being thought of and written of, there were various different subjects which were being addressed by these writers. But at the same time, you will find that there were a bunch of writers who also visited the past, the classical writings of the previous generation, the previous age. They were revisited. So, in order to understand the Romantic age, we did today discuss the 6 major features of the Romantic age. Let me go back to them once again so that you will clearly understand these features. Number 1, there was abundance of output. A lot of works were being written. As I said, similar to the Elizabethan age. The second thing that you will notice is all the different genres were being written during this period. So there were novels. Novels took a very, very important, but then you will not find plays or dramas being written during this period. That's the only exception that you will find. Novels did make a beginning here, and then they became quite popular, and you will find that it continued to remain popular, and it continues to remain popular even today as one of the most prominent genres of English literature. But we should remember that it made its beginning with the Romantic age, where some of the best historical romances were written, and we have to give due credit to Sir Walter Scott, who was responsible for such writings. So during the Romantic age, we've had lots of writings. Mainly you will find poetry written. That was the most dominant kind of genre which you will find. You will also find that periodical writings or pamphlets which were popularized during this period. Now I repeat that there were a number of periodicals and pamphlets which were being published during this period. I did give you the list of some of the most prominent ones, like Edinburgh Review or the Morning Post. These were some of the periodicals which were being written and published, and there were a number of them, and still they continued to remain popular and widely read kind of a genre. So therefore they were written to a great extent. You will find that these periodical writings and pamphlets are one of the major features of this Romantic age, as we had discussed earlier. The other major feature which I would like to repeat again, there are two more which I would like to repeat again. One is the influence of the foreign language, here being German. As I said, because of the rift between France and England, German language became more prominent, and it found its place in the writings. I did mention Shelley, who's inspired by the writings, and you would find the influences of the German language in the writings of Keats and Shelley. You would also have noticed that the sixth literary feature which I discussed was the American literature. America as a young nation came into existence and had begun to produce some of the literary works, and it was beginning to make its mark in the field of literature. And it is here that you will find that novels became quite popular. Novels found a place in American literature. The young nation, when it came into existence and tried to experiment with literature, it was novel form which they tried to popularize, or rather it became popular, and it's even today the most popular genre of English literature. But then America, when it as a young nation, definitely encouraged novel writings to the maximum. So this is how the study of the literary features of the Romantic age. Now that you have understood the background, the historical background, the social background, the writers, the prominent writers, be it the poets, the novelists, or the pamphleteers, or writers of periodicals, all these people, all these writers and the writings will definitely depict the England of the Romantic age. You will find that a lot of rural landscape is being discussed. When I talk about the return of the nature, it's mainly because of the urbanization. You will find that less of town is being discussed in the works of this period. It is mainly the poetry which became the focus, and in poetry it is the rural life, the villages, the landscape of the village, the rural life, which was popularized in the writings. It was like going away from the city life, the despair and the lack of the hopelessness, the feeling of despair, and the feeling of resentment after the war definitely is reflected in the writings, where there were low wages, and we did talk about the reform bills. So basically the kind of an upheaval that the people of England were experiencing during that time. That is why I said it's very important to understand the social condition of the country, the people of the country, the experiences that they have had during that period, because these are the things that will find place in the literature that were written during this period. French Revolution definitely is the most important feature, in the sense when we talk about the historical background. The French Revolution did play a major significant role in the in influencing the literature of the Romantic age. So you will find that a deliberate going away from the influence of the France, mainly because of the kind of a tension that was growing between these two countries resultant of the war, and therefore their affiliation or their kind of a dependency on the German language and the influence of the German language in the literature of the Romantic Age. So you will find these different ages where different kind of political scenarios that were created during this period. The politics, the social condition, everything had a deep impact on the literature of any age for that matter. So therefore, before we proceed towards reading and appreciating the text written by any writers, it is very important to understand the kind of a background, because we in India, we live a different life, we have different experiences, we are not aware of the kind of experiences that people had during the Romantic Age in England. So therefore, if we understand these background, it becomes easier for us to understand the text and to appreciate the text. Now, the two books that we should read, one is the text, that is the History of English Literature by Edward Albert. This is the book which is prescribed by Gujarat University for the students of English literature, and it's a very comprehensive study of English literature where you will get a clear idea about the political background, the historical background, the social condition, and how these in fact influenced the writings of different ages. The other book, this being the textbook, need to be read thoroughly, and the answers should be basically derived from that book, because that's a prescribed text of the university. The other book, History of English Literature by Dr. Sharad Rajimwale, is also a very interesting book for students who find English author difficult to understand. Therefore, this book also covers all the different aspects of English, the history of English literature. It deals with the features of various ages. Since today we discussed about the Romantic Age, you will find more details in these books. If you read it, you will enjoy reading. But with this kind of a background that I gave you today, where you have to understand all those 6 prominent features of the Romantic Age, and you will find that these things would be reflected in the writings of these ages. So if for your understanding, for your knowledge, I would like to repeat those features once again for you, so that you remember this very well and you are able to reproduce them during your exams, and it makes it easier for you to understand even while you read the text now. So we did talk about all the 6 features at length. The abundance of output. Abundance means plentiful, large number. A lot of works were being written and read during this period. After the end of the French Revolution, the kind of a despair and the kind of a despondency that had set in are reflected in some of the initial works, but it also finds a kind of hope with returning to the nature, going back to the rural life, experiencing the rural, moving from the urban. These are the points that you have to understand while appreciating the texts that are written during this Romantic age, because the subtitle itself says Return of the Nature. So where nature plays a very, very prominent role in the literature of this period. It is nature in the glorified sense. Nature is glorified here. Nature is amplified here. Nature is presented in different ways by different writers. Everybody had a different perception towards nature, and it is the writer's perception tinged with the imagination of these writers, because imagination as a creative process was developed during this period. So we do talk about the abundance of literature. We also know that during this period the kind of writings that were written and popularized, or rather appreciated and read, were definitely the ones which talked about nature. So nature plays a very prominent role, therefore the subtitle that the return of the nature. So that is glorified, amplified. These are the words I keep repeating so that you know how you have to answer the questions. We also talk about, as I said, abundance of output is a very important factor or feature of this Romantic age. But at the same time, you will find that there were two pamphlet writing and periodical writings were two things which came into existence during this period, and a lot of them were written and read by the people. They were published. I did give you the names: Morning Post, Edinburgh Review, and many of them. The list is endless. A lot of such periodicals were written. Some of them became quite popular, the others didn't. And finally, two more features which I would like to repeat before I conclude today's session: the influence of the German language and American literature. These two are also very important. It's the onset of the American literature, because it's now that America as a young nation started contributing towards literature, and in the American literature you will find that it was definitely novel form which became quite popular. So need I repeat the features once again: abundance of output, glorifying nature, a lot of work being written about nature, addressing nature, appealing to the people to go back to nature. These were the things which were addressed. So nature plays a very prominent role. Then you have the periodicals and the pamphlet writing, which were very important contributions of the Romantic age. The influence of German language as a foreign language, the influx of German language into English, and finally the American literature and its birth, which took place during this period, during the Romantic age. It came into existence, and it is later on that it really grows and flourishes, the literature. But it began the onset of the American literature can be traced to the Romantic age. Thank you.
Sandhan, All Gujarat Integrated Classroom.
સેટેલાઇટના માધ્યમથી જોડતી કડી એટલે સંધાન.